We talk on this channel all the time about how far FDM 3D printers have come and evolved over the years. The firmware has gotten smarter and more feature-rich, the hardware has gotten more reliable, and there is a ton of 3D printing filaments to choose from that just weren't available a couple of years ago. On top of that, the slicing software has evolved drastically. When I first got into 3D printing in 2014, the slicing software was just really poor. There wasn't a lot of options, there was no real set standards, very little features, all sorts of bugs where you'd slice and it would crash your computer or crash down the software, or you'd slice something and the output made no sense based off of the parameters you put into the slicer. Now, today, just a few years later, I mean, granted 6 years later, but even a few years later, the slicing software has gotten really damn good and we have a ton of awesome choices to choose from, and they are all the time implementing new features to make your printing more consistent and give you further control of your models that you're printing out. Resin 3D printers, although in my opinion still a couple of years behind FDM as far as popularity goes, have grown a ton over the last couple of years and is quickly catching up. The printers have gotten a lot better, bigger, reliable, less expensive, and there are more and more resins coming out for high strength, for flexibility, and just other various properties. Well, the one thing that I think has been really missing in the resin field is slicer options. Now, I talk on this channel quite often, at least almost in every resin review video, about Chitubox. Chitubox has been my go-to resin slicer for at least the last 1 to 2 years after me first getting into resin printing and using a few different manufacturer-specific slicers that were just terrible and buggy. Once I found Chitubox, I dreaded using anything else that was out there. Well, in the last 6 months, or maybe even a little bit longer than that now, I've heard talks and people commenting and mentioning a slicer called Lychee that they said I should absolutely check out. And based off of my other experience with slicers and being stuck in my ways and just happy with the Chitubox slicer, I kind of said, nah, I'm okay, I'll just stick with what I've got. Until recently, when I did decide to dive in and take a look inside of the Lychee slicer to see what it was all about. And I've got to say that I was really impressed and wish that I had taken a look at it a little bit sooner, because it just had a lot more going on for it than I thought that it would, and even has some features inside of it that I think it does a lot better than Chitubox does. So in today's video, we are going to take a dive into Lychee Slicer. I will take you through importing pretty much the whole workflow, from setting up a printer profile to importing a model to hollowing, adding supports, all the different, as many of the different settings in there that I can. So hopefully you have a better idea if this is kind of a slicer you may want to check out. Personally, I absolutely think it's worth downloading and at least checking out based off my experience, but hopefully again, after watching this video, you'll have gained more familiarity and decide whether this is a slicer for you. So enough rambling, there is a ton to cover, and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. All right, so here we are inside of Lychee Slicer 3. 3.3.2 is the latest as of recording. I did want to state right away that there is a free and a paid version. I've only used the free version, and I think that for most everyone, that is going to be sufficient, but there is a 30-day free trial, it looks like, for the Pro version, if there are some features in here labeled as Pro that you're interested in. And as far as pricing goes, the pricing is $3.99 in, I believe, euros, if you pay month-to-month, or $2.49 if you pay per month if you pay for the year up front. So whether no matter how you feel about paid slicers, I definitely don't want to get into that, but I did want to at least make sure that I was clear about that up front, that there is, again, a paid version. So the free version's all I've used, and I think it's great, and that is what we're going to be going over in this video. So as far as getting started, one thing that caught me by surprise is just the sheer amount of printer profiles that are baked into here. Now, Chitubox also has a ton. I haven't done a side-by-side to see which truly has more, but I will say that any resin printer that I'm really familiar with is in here, which is fantastic for someone that just wants to get up and running and doesn't want to have to input a bunch of settings into a slicer. So this is super cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose, like, let's see here. We'll do Phenom. I've already got a couple different ones up here, but and then it'll automatically load all of the machine settings. It'll give you so this has got like an official profile. You are able to modify these things if you want to, but I would certainly say if you're new and starting off with, don't play with any of these settings. Just leave them as is, since they're at least marked in here as official, and I'm sure tested, or at least what is recommended by the manufacturer. So once we're all set up, we'll exit out of here. We've got our build plate, which this is again for the Phenom, which is why it's very, very large. And then you can either drag and drop your files in or just click this to open up a window, which is what I'm going to do. So we've got our little ModBot robot in here. And the first thing I wanted to say is that this little thing down here, I actually love this little bit of information that says it's the Phenom. I'm using the default profile, what the total height is of the part. If you click the estimated 3D printing time, it'll quickly calculate that at 8 hours and 52 minutes. And the resin volume, which will take just a few seconds longer, will run over and give you, okay, cool, 32 milliliters. And you can also set the price, so the price can display here. And you, again, as you update things, you can just quickly retally that. And with Chitubox, you have to go through the entire slicing process for that to happen, and it takes a lot longer. So again, this just might seem small, but having that right there is super cool. As far as layout goes, it's quite similar to that of Chitubox. You've got a little bit of options on the left side, you've got options on the top, and you'll soon see that there is a sidebar here. So the work flow to me in Lychee Slicer just makes a lot of sense. So we've got layout, which is what we're currently in. This is where you're going to do all of your positioning. So you can go ahead and click on the object, and the first one, arrange, will allow you to pivot him left or right. I'm just going to go ahead and undo that. Then you've got move, which of course everybody knows, move your object back and forth. And then your traditional rotate, where you can go left or right, or back and forth. It'll automatically drop to build plate. There are a couple of different rotation options, like rotate on plate, O to O, orient to object, auto orientate, which if I click that, it'll do what it thinks it's best, which personally, I don't think that that's best based off of it. Doesn't know that I don't want the face to have supports on it. But again, if it was not an object that had, not a character object, then perhaps that would have made sense. But we'll go ahead and just undo that. But yeah, there is your rotation. And then as far as scaling goes, just like in, like Chitubox, you've got the ability to scale just by typing in. You can also type in a certain length in millimeters. You can unlock if you want to be able to scale, maybe we want this side 100 and the rest of it different, so that he's got a shrunken face. And then we'll go ahead and undo. And one thing that's cool, well, although I just hit undo a bunch of times, one thing that's really cool is that there's just this reset scale button. So if you screw things up, one click of that and he's back to what he originally was sized at. And if you want max size, we can just click fit to bed and he scales up to maximum size, which, I mean, you see how snappy this is. Like, it's really impressive. Also to me, just how smooth this software really seems to work. So we'll reset him. I don't need him to be that big. Lastly, we've got copy function, which is, if you want multiple, we can just quickly say, let's get 3 of them. We'll auto arrange it, duplicate selection. It'll quickly go ahead and place them in the same orientation and kind of space them out so that way they are not running into each other. So the mirror will quickly allow you to kind of spin them around. I almost feel like mirror should be in the rotate section as like a quick way to, if you want to mirror the X, Y, or Z, but it has its own little menu here, but that's what that does. Again, if you just want to flip them in a certain direction, you can quickly and easily do that by just clicking these buttons. And then lastly is measure, which measure is a pro. Again, it's under pro, so the paid version. However, and they might patch this, but right now, like if you clicked on a part, you can actually click and drag and it kind of snaps. It actually works really smoothly and see like, okay, his head's roughly 26 millimeters. And so not that this is something I've ever really needed. And most of this is stuff that I would be doing on the CAD side of things and not in the slicer side of things, but I do think it's interesting. If you try to click the second point, it'll then pop up. Oops, I didn't do it correctly. It'll then pop up. Like, let's click there and tell you, measurements is only as a pro subscription. And again, with that being said, though, you could still totally measure things without actually clicking. So I don't know if that's something that they'll, patch so that way only the pro version can do that, but I felt like it was worth pointing out. And then something that's really interesting to me, which again, is me being someone that's been resin printing for quite a while now, like I don't think I would ever particularly use this. But there is this magic button down here. And for somebody that's just starting out with resin 3D printing and doesn't really understand the different slicer settings, I do think that you should absolutely learn all the different slicer settings and gain familiarity. But let's say you just got a printer and you really want to get up and printing as soon as possible, and you're okay with, kind of learning as you go, but you really just want to get a print going. Well, this is a pretty awesome thing for that. And it basically is called magic, and you can choose what you're going to allow it to do. So you can have it do everything: auto orientate the part, auto supports, optimize supports, bracing supports, raft supports, and then you just got to tell it, do you want light, medium, or heavy? With this particular model, I did do heavy when I printed him large, but because he's not scaled, we'll just go ahead and go with medium supports. Click the I'm feeling lucky button, and it will run through its process of placing him at an angle, auto-generating supports, auto-generating rafts, kind of, you know, embracing. I mean, this right here is pretty impressive. Like, if I were going to take my time and go through all this, I would probably print him a little bit different. Like, I would have this as being the back because I know this is a character model and I'd rather not have supports on the side of his face if I can have them on the back side. But man, for somebody that's just starting out and really just wants to print and have results quickly and then kind of learn the ins and outs of the different slicing settings, that is pretty powerful and not something I've ever seen. Certainly not in resin printing. I'm trying to think if with FDM printing I've really seen all those things baked into one. But yeah, that is super cool. And again, I do think that although this is slightly different than how I would have placed it, I don't see why this wouldn't be a successful print. This is nearly identical to what I would have done by hand, but it certainly would have taken me longer than just smacking that button. So we'll go ahead and undo that, but that is definitely something that is a very unique feature. Now that we're done with placing our object, which let's go ahead and actually mirror him because we'll kind of do it as if I was really going to be printing him. We will move on to the support tab. And so in the support tab, you have quite a few different options here. So on the right side, we've got this menu where you can basically choose the different cone type, which is going to be the area where it actually connects to your model. Cone is kind of the standard one, and that's what's given to you. Cross and cube are both in the paid version, but again, cone is what's primarily used. You can adjust things with the sliders like the diameter, the tip diameter, the tip length, and then, I mean, if you want to, you could realistically just start clicking around and placing. I mean, again, these are heavy, so I'd probably go with light or medium just because heavy is overkill for a model like this. But yeah, you can just start placing supports by clicking around and it will place them no problem. And if they're close together, it'll kind of group them a bit. And then if you, for some reason, aren't happy with the support, if you just click on one that you've placed, you can go ahead and click delete. It's, of course, got auto generation, so low, normal, high, and ultra as far as support density goes. So we'll set this to medium. We'll set the support density to normal, and we will just click the generate automatic support. And I'm going to allow it to delete what I placed because those don't need to be there. And it gives you a brief summary again of kind of what it just did, which is cool. Not that you necessarily care, but I do think it's kind of cool that it tells you that. And then same goes here. So even once you're here, if you for some reason aren't happy, you can place some additional supports. You can click on one that it's already placed and you can delete that. So there is a lot of things that, again, you can do as far as customization of supports in here. So let's say you placed a bunch of manual supports, right? Like, I think for most people, you're probably going automatic, but like you place a bunch of different supports just kind of here and there. This is definitely not where you'd want them, but I'm just for, you know, example's sake. And normally with supports, you'd want to have them connect, like interlock with each other to help support themselves, because as they get taller, they get a little bit more wobbly, and you definitely want to have some connections between them. Well, all you have to do is go down here on the right side, click this bracing button. It will quickly calculate and add braces between supports that are close to each other. So again, really, really easy to use. There's some more stuff here as well, but I do think that the support generation on this is also quite fantastic. You've got a few different view options, so if you can view the entire supports when they're placed. So over here, you have the ability to kind of change the view of the supports. You can check to see the entire supports, the tips and the bases, only the tips where it's connecting to your model. So that way, again, if you go in here and you're like, yeah, I don't really want that one to be right there, it gives you a nice visualization of what's going on. Like, I mean, and also a tiny little view of kind of what's going on as far as the direction of they'd be placed at and where the bridges between them would be. To me, this is a lot nicer of an experience than the Chitubox support side of things. So again, I really like this. You can see, contact points even smaller than that if you want. So we'll go ahead and place all. As far as rafts go, we'll go ahead and click on raft. The free version has the ability to use cylinder, cube, pixelate, rectangular, grid, or not grid. These are, again, some of the pro options, but I don't actually think that Chitubox has very many options as far as supports. I think I'm usually using what they call the skate support, if I'm not mistaken. And so it is kind of cool that you have the option to, again, use different use different raft types if you wanted. I'm going to go with typically the standard. I think pixelate is kind of the equivalent to what Chitubox uses, and that's kind of primarily what I use. But you do have the option to Again, use a few different rafts and you can scale that as much as you want. Let me see if I go, if you see here, it kind of scales up the raft down there. You can choose the thickness of the raft. So you've got full control over the raft, which that is overkill. And honestly, some of the default settings are probably fine. As you can see here, we've now got supports and we've got our raft. We'll also next go ahead and hollow our model. We will turn hollowing to on. We will choose our wall thickness, which I'm just going to leave it at 2.5. For infill, you have the ability to basically have an infill pattern with this slicer, which I have not played around with, and I've actually never used an infill pattern, so I'm going to turn infill off to 0. I don't use infill pattern, at least in the past when hollowing. So one thing I really like about, again, this kind of hollow section right here is it actually updates live. So although I just clicked, I clicked the hollowing settings, and in Chichibox, you have to click basically hollow now. As soon as I clicked on, it already hollowed him out. And so if I scroll or scrub down, you can see, okay, there he is. Like, that's how thick the walls are, which look pretty damn thick, to be perfectly honest with you, for 2.5 millimeters. So you can drag in real time and watch it as it updates and get a real good visualization of, okay, that's how thick it's going to be. You know, for this example, you know, this small model, if I was printing it on a smaller resin printer, maybe I would just go with the 1.5 millimeter wall. But I do really like that it allows you to see it, again, in real time. So that way, as you're just sliding things across, and so like, let's say you wanted to do infill, and I chose 33% or, you know, so on and so forth. You can see also kind of how the infill is going to be looking internally. And I'm not going to use infill. I might have to experiment with that at a later point, but I do just really like that it updates so quickly and live on the fly. That is a really powerful feature. And then of course, if we go ahead and just put this all the way back up, we have the option to hollow, or not hollow, but add holes, which is something you'd want to do to add drain holes. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I would normally want to do this before I added the supports, but luckily, because it is really easy to just do like a contact made button, you can very easily now see kind of where things are and add those drain holes without the supports getting in the way. So we'll go ahead and go here, click add hole again, and just similar to how I previously did this, we will, let's see, click here, click here, click here, and did one towards his butt. So click there. So now that we've got the holes placed, the one thing I haven't seen to be able to do, which is kind of interesting to me, is you can live scrub the wall thickness, but it doesn't actually add the holes. Like, it places little pegs, but you won't actually see those holes until you go to the next page. But there are a couple of cool things you can do. Again, you've got the option over here to change the hole shape from cylinder to cube. You've got the option again to change diameter, and as well as under here it shows penetration, but basically going to be the depth of the holes. And then you also have something that's kind of neat, is that you can actually make an object a hole. So like, let's say you wanted a specific hole of some sort, like maybe it was a, I don't know, an X pattern. Well, you can drag that in, place it where you want it to be placed, and then click on. It would turn, like if I clicked on the Modbot robot and clicked on, it would actually turn the entire object into a hole. So that's kind of neat. Again, not something I necessarily see as being something you'd use daily as a daily driver, but still kind of cool that it's got some additional features like that. So next up, we are done here. He's got his drain holes, we've got our supports, and we are ready to go on to the preview page. But in the preview tab, you've got a couple options. You can basically split your model into multiple parts if perhaps it's too big, or you want to print it in different sections, or maybe export it as an STL and then kind of manipulate it after that. You've got a slice button, which will allow you to just kind of scrub through, and you can see basically the the image, which is what's going to be displayed essentially from the LCD screen. You've got a picture button, which is the exact same, just top-down view of that image if you want to get a, make sure that everything is looking correctly. There's a simulator button, which is kind of cool, which will allow you to drag up the build plate so you can kind of see how it's going to be positioned on the build plate if you just want a better visualization, which I don't know that I'd really use, but still think it's kind of cool. And then you've got an add a scale button, which to me is just funny. It places it on a craft mat with a banana. So again, not super, maybe not super useful, I suppose, in that regard, but still kind of cool. It just has some of these silly things. And then the last step, of course, is once you're happy with your model, so we'll go ahead and just go back to object, and we want to export it, is click the export button. Here it will give you, again, all those details as far as how long it's going to take to print. If you wanted to see how much resin it's going to take, again, you just quickly click on the bottom left. It'll calculate that for you. That way you know that, hey, I'll need at least 23.69 milliliters. But yeah, so when you hit export, it'll go ahead and again grab printer and the official profile. You can choose to select if you want anti-aliasing, which if your printer has that, which the Phenom does, so you can choose that. You can choose where you want to have this saved as far as if you've got different hard drives attached. The format, which I believe that is the older format, and this is a smaller file type, the .ctb, if I remember correctly. You can also, again, export it as an OBJ or an STL if you want to take it into a different slicer like Chitubox to do some tweaks, or whatever mesh mix or whatever you use to modify your STLs, you can do that as well. And then I don't know what export scene is. I'm assuming it's maybe some kind of a photo or maybe something to do with like the 3D Pro version that I saw. I'm not quite positive. So again, in this instance, we're just going to export. It's ready to go. And this is where maybe the most, like, I guess, irritating aspect of the free version is that you do have to have a 20-second ad displayed when you're trying to export. Now, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's 20 seconds, and they are letting you use essentially, it seems like 80 to 90% of the slicer for free, and when they've got a paid version. So being that, again, I make YouTube videos and ads are essentially a way I'm able to offer YouTube videos and help kind of support myself, I understand this ad placement, but I do think that for somebody that's slicing and printing a ton, that might get old, especially if you're trying to make some little tweaks. So then every time you have to wait 20 seconds. So again, if you're printing at high volume, the paid version, if it makes sense at, what was it? I think $2.50 or 250 euros, might make sense. But regardless, just hit continue. It'll go ahead and allow you to save it where you want to, and you're ready to rock and roll. And that is Lychee Slicer, or Lychee Slicer 3 as of today. I'm sure, again, they'll add additional features as time progresses. It seems like they're quite active, and I am really surprised it's taken me so long to play around with this. Again, I think I was just stuck in my old ways with Chitubox, but I will absolutely be using this slicer quite a bit because I like the overall UI quite a bit better. I think there's some additional features and functionality, and I don't know if Chitubox just kind of hasn't been doing as much development, but I don't think I've seen quite as many things in Chitubox advancing, while this seems to have come up really quickly, and I am super curious to see how things continue to go, already how far they've come and where this slicer continues to go over the following months and years here. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope that you, again, learned a little bit more about this slicer and it helped you determine whether this is something you may want to do. And if you do dive into the slicer, hopefully watching this video will help explain a little bit more about the workflow and kind of how the different tools work within the slicer. If there is any additional features, or if you've been using this slicer, let me know if there's any features in here that maybe I forgot to cover or should have covered a little bit more. And if you do try out the slicer, be sure to let me know in the comments down below what your opinion is on it and what your overall experience is like. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. I make a video every single week, so there is always fresh content coming your way. And if you did want to support the channel furthermore, I'll place links down below in the description over to my Patreon, where there are some really awesome rewards. Huge thank you, as always, to all of my current Patreon supporters. I appreciate each and every one of you, and you guys allow me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making content each and every week for you all to enjoy. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.